Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this week's Parshat Vayera. We're in Parshat Ches Pasuk Beis. So Avram Avinu just had his bris milah, and in order to give Avram Avinu some rest from chasing and always looking for guests, Hashem made it extremely hot outside. However, when Hashem saw that Avram Avinu was in pain, was upset, disturbed that he couldn't perform the mitzvah of Hachnasas Archim, Hashem sent 3 malachim to visit him. Now, even though these 3 malachim, interestingly enough, we're going to come to Avram Avinu anyways, as we're going to see, but the pasuk is going to teach us an important yesod in the manner of how they came to Avram Avinu. So the Hachaim is going to analyze the following pasuk. Vayisa Einov, and Avram Avinu lifted his eyes. Vayar, and he saw v'hine shloisha anashim nitzavim alav. And behold, right, there all of a sudden seems to be there were 3 people standing on him. Vayar, he saw again. Vayaris lekrosam, and he ran after them. He passed the oil from the opening of the tent. Vayishtachu artzam. So obviously, if you analyze the wording of the psukim, as we're going to see inside, it raises a lot of questions. So says the Hachaim, Tzarchanu ladas. We have to understand, Lama hutzach loima vihine. Why did the pasuk have to say that Avram Avinu lifted his eyes, he saw, and all of a sudden there were 3 people on top of him? What's all of a sudden coming to teach us? Gam lama hutzach loima nitzavim. What is the word nitzavim, right, coming to teach us? The word nitzavim means standing. Minastam nitzavim you. Simply stated, says the Hachaim, obviously they must have been standing in front of him. If they were walking in the street, right, they didn't have cars in those days, and it doesn't seem that they were on the wagons. It seems that they were walking towards him. They were standing. What does the Torah have to teach us that they were standing? Why does it say Allah? The word Allah seems to be they were standing on him. Doesn't make sense to say that they were standing on him. Eloi mashmus. If you want to say shesmuchim elav, that it really means that they were next to him. That also doesn't make sense, says the Hachaim, because the next word says, Vayoretz lekrosam, he ran towards them. So it's a little bit of a contradiction. On the one hand, it says that they were standing next to him, alav. Then it says he was running towards them. So which one is it? Were they standing right next to him, or were they far away that he had to run to them? Oid kasha. Oimer pam shniya vayar. Why does it have to say a second time that he saw them? You already told me in the beginning that he lifted his eyes, that Avram Avinu lifted his eyes and he saw them. Well, he speak b'rishayna. Why was it enough for the first time? Before Avram Avinu recognized that they were actually malachim, pasuk says that he bowed down to them. Why would he bow down to them? Maybe they were Arabs. They were idol worshippers. Now, even though today Arabs, you can make an argument if they're considered idol worshippers or not. But for sure, in those days, the Arabs were not like the Arabs today. There was no Islam. They believed in whatever deities they believed in, but it wasn't Islam. So why was Avram Avinu bowing down to them? That would seem to be that he would be bowing down to whatever Avodah Zarah they serve. So says the Hachaim, a series of questions. And from this series of questions, we're going to come to a very interesting question. Let's say, Lu Yitzur, a malach, knocked on your door and asked you for tzedakah. Or Eliyahu Navi knocked on your door and asked you for tzedakah, or asked you to help him with a favor, or for food. Do you get a mitzvah for that? Is it considered that I did a mitzvah, or not? What's the question? The Hachaim is going to discuss this point and the different stadim. Now, obviously, when a malach doesn't eat, and obviously a malach doesn't need tzedakah, but we're going to learn from here a point. And from this yesod, we're going to see a very important idea when it comes to doing a mitzvah. The intent of the pasuk really is what the next pasuk is coming to teach us. They were actually malachim, but they came in the figure of human beings, which means they actually were flesh and blood. They actually had a body. They didn't just look like a person. It seems to be, according to this pshat, that they look like humans. Now, I don't know if Avram Avinu would have touched them, what would have they touched like a physical thing? If it would have went through them? It seems to be that they looked 100% human. In order that they should come and reside, right, have achnasa by Avram, in order that he could do the mitzvah of achnasas archim. Vayar v'hine. Pirush. That's why the pasuk says Vayar, he saw v'hine. Pirush mashenira hu anashim. What it looked to him that they were regular people, ve'enam came. If he said that there were three people, it would look to be a lie, that because there weren't really three people. So the pasuk used what for us would be like a little bit of a funny language, and actually was to teach us that they look like people, but they were really malachim. Right? Remember, we're learning the pasuk because we already know the pasuk from 3rd and 4th grade. But assuming that this is the first time you're learning the pasuk, right? You don't know anything that they were malachim. So what would generate this idea to ask you this question? When you learn the pasuk for the first time ever, and it says Vayar v'hine shloisha anashim, you ask yourself, the wording doesn't seem to make sense. Hachaim says the reason that it's in a funny way is to provoke a question, and the answer would be is yes, they look like people, but they were really malachim. Right? We're looking at the pasuk from a backwards point of view because we already know that they're malachim. The pasuk was written always, the first time you learn it, is it should generate a question. What's the question? Why does he have to tell me that they were there? And the answer is that because they weren't really people. They look like people, but they're really malachim. So why does it say they were standing? Right? Because the fact that Avram knew very well what malachim looked like, because we know that Avram was extremely close to Hakadosh Baruch Hu, and Avram Avinu, as we know by Hagar, they knew their malachim interacted with them on a daily basis. We didn't even know what this means. But it was such a common occurrence that angels would be in their presence that even Hagar, the non-Jewish, the daughter of Paroi, recognized the malach. And when she saw a malach, it was like she saw me and you in the street. He understood that the word nitzavim doesn't mean the regular explanation of nitzavim, standing, but rather they were coming for a specific purpose, right? They were coming as appointees to do something. And what were they coming? Shekain hoya, echel l'rufuasai, one came to heal him, ve'echel l'vasa ke'es chaya, and one was to tell him that in a year from now, Yitzchak would be born. And the other one, the third one, va'echel hagam shayahoylech lahafech esdoim, even though he wasn't really coming for Avram Avinu, but since he came with the other malachim, he waited. Because really they needed two malachim to go to Sodom. One was to save Lot, and the other one was to destroy Sodom. So therefore, since he had to go to other malachim, in the honor of Avram Avinu, he came together with them in order that there should be three. Ad ashadibra Hashem elav, v'hoyim ashahaya. V'oz, and then, panav v'halach, he went away. So all this was for Avram Avinu, which means that all these three people, all these three malachim rather, they all came for Avram Avinu. Now we wouldn't know this unless the pasuk used this interesting word of nitzavim. That not they were regular people, that they actually looked like men. In order that Avram Avinu should be able to fulfill the mitzvah of achnasas archim. If he wouldn't have sent them as regular people and they would have came as malachim, Avram Avinu would not have been able to fulfill the mitzvah of achnasas archim. Not that he couldn't give them food. Obviously they wouldn't have eaten the food. But there's no mitzvah to give a malach something. The mitzvah is only to another human being. Which means from here we see a very interesting yesod. The mitzvah is not only on the recipient, but it's actually on the giver. When I give tzedakah to somebody, by me giving is what generates the mitzvah, not necessarily the recipient. Right? Obviously, the recipient is an important part of the equation. Memela says the Hachaim from here that by coming as individual people, even though he recognized that they were malachim, he was able to fulfill the mitzvah of achnasas archim. We know there's a famous medrash that Eliyahu Hanavi has a shell, a body, that he hangs in Shemayim, whatever that means. There are sometimes that Avram Avinu comes to this world as in malach. usually by a bris, when he comes to learn with a tzaddik, and sometimes he comes in the shape of a human being. This is a famous Chasam Sofer who brings this medrash down, that sometimes Avram Avinu comes as a human, sometimes he comes as a malach. I think there's also a medrash with Yaakov Avinu as well. What does it help by coming as a human? There are certain aspects that he has to interact with people that could only be him being as a human being, as opposed to being a malach. So here too, we see from here that Hakadosh Baruch Hu specifically wanted these three malachim to come in the form of a human in order to give Avram Avinu the mitzvah of Achnasas Archim. So the whole thing that Hashem arranged, this meeting, was not to tell only Avram that he was going to be healed, he was going to have a son, and to save Lot and to destroy Sodom. For that, Hashem could have easily just sent malachim. He specifically had them come in a human form in order that Avram Avinu should be able to fill the mitzvah of Achnasas Archim.